Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new edition of the Lasching Out Podcast and Nittany Sports Now Network. My name is Jarrod Prugar, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Kevin Quigley. Kevin, Penn State came up just short. There's no better way to say it than Penn State was just on the cusp of potentially playing next Monday for the national championship, but alas, they are not. They did not do what needed to be done late in the game, just fend off a pretty good Notre Dame team. And their season came to an end 27-24 at the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, and I posed the question before the playoff. Penn State had SMU, and then they had Boise State. And I posed the question, if Penn State beats both SMU and Boise State but loses in the semifinal round, does it invalidate the first two wins of the College Football Playoff? And I don't think it does. I was worried that maybe it did. But the performance that Penn State put on the field at Hard Rock Stadium on Thursday night, that was a team that was capable of winning. This was a legitimate top five matchup. Notre Dame, I think, was ranked 3 in the country in the AP, seeded 1 seed below Penn State in the College Football Playoff rankings. But they belonged. The first half, they absolutely dominate. Probably should have been up a little bit more than they were. And I thought James Franklin coached an excellent game. 2 times went for 4th downs in the first half. I agreed with the decision to go for it both times. He was aggressive there at the end of the game, which I'm sure we'll get to. This is one of those, and sure, he's 1-15 against top 5 opponents, but this isn't the other 15 games prior to that. That was a team that was legitimately there, and that was a coin flip game, and unfortunately, they were just on the wrong side of the coin flip.
Absolutely, and I think the biggest thing is, it's easy to hit the low-hanging fruit, the record against top 5 teams, right? But a lot of those teams have been better than Penn State. He has played that many games against top 5 opponents because Ohio State is perennially in the top 5. Michigan is perennially in the top 5 of late. And obviously, they didn't have a great year this year, but of course, they beat Ohio State. Penn State's 3 losses this year came to 2 teams that are playing for the national championship and an Oregon team that was the number 1 seed coming into the playoff, the number 1 ranked team coming into the playoff. This was not on James Franklin, by all means. Their playing to win, I thought, was great. Their attitude after Ohio State completely changed, and it changed the complexity of their season and how that looked. They played to win. You saw that against Oregon. You saw that against SMU. You saw that against Boise State. You saw the aggressiveness. And listen, the play call, I thought, on that last play on the interception was what it needed to be. You just hit a splat. You just hit an explosive run. You need to get closer to field goal range. Why not try to throw it? Now, the route, not good. The throwing off the back foot, not good. The pass protection, not good. Good play call, just not well executed by anybody on Penn State's team. That's what cost them the game. The lack of execution against the Notre Dame team that came out in the second half and out-schemed Penn State probably better than anybody has all year. Those were some really good adjustments. They marched down the field and scored to tie up the game. Alex Angeli, I'm sorry, I know I'm butchering that name, but Angeli for Notre Dame came in and, I'm sorry, not Alex. I think it's Sam Angeli, or Steve Angeli. Geez, I don't know enough about these names, but he came in and provided a spark for Notre Dame when Riley Leonard was in the concussion tent. And that was huge. And Marcus Freeman, whatever he said at halftime, whatever adjustments they made, they just worked. And it's okay to admit the other team might have had 3 or 4 plays that were better than yours. Riley Leonard had some pretty good passes there. Obviously, the last touchdown pass, a 54-yard touchdown pass, you had Cam Miller fall, and then you also had Jalen Reed fall as well. And if they don't do that, and he gets tackled, or that ball doesn't get thrown, then is the game different? I think at that point, Penn State had an 85% chance to win, according to the win predictability. But again, at the end of the day, Notre Dame out-executed Penn State, and now Notre Dame gets to play Ohio State in what is certainly a weird situation for Penn State fans everywhere.
Yeah, and if you look, like, that team showed a lot of grit, showed a lot of resolve. They kind of came out sleepy in the third quarter, but Marcus Freeman made excellent adjustments. And it's not that Penn State didn't adjust. It's that Marcus Freeman is also a very capable coach. He's a very good coach, and he's done a lot of good things at Notre Dame. And since the NIU loss, like that's a really big, different program. And they were out with something to prove because I'm sure they've heard NIU all season long. And yeah, the drive, I loved it. They get the ball back with 41 seconds on the clock. Nick Singleton goes for 13 yards. That's all you're trying to do on first down. If you get 2, 3, 4 yards, okay, it's
that's after a false start.
Yeah, no false start on that one. That was the drive before.
Okay.
Sorry to correct you, but you get 13. You get 13 yards. You get a chunk play on the ground. Okay, it's go time. Like, let's see if we can get into field goal range because 2, 3, 4 yards. Yeah, you play for OT. You have less than 40 seconds left by the end of the play. Play clock can take you to the end of regulation, but you get that chunk play. Now let's go aggressive. We can go quick tempo. We can get Notre Dame on their heels, and let's go. Let's go try to win this game because they were with the wind. The wind was going left to right on the TV screen. This was the favorable end to be kicking on the range. And ultimately, it just comes down to one bad pass. And everybody is piling on Drew. He's going to learn from this. This whole team's going to learn from this. And you can tell how much the team trusts Drew Aller. Everybody's round and round. Even Devon J. Thomas is like, look, it is what it is. We live and die by the quarterback, but it's a team game. And the leap that Drew made from last year to this year was incredible. His performance against Notre Dame was, I'm sure, not up to his own personal standards. And that's just how it goes. Like some nights you just have an off night. Game 1 of the World Series, you throw your ace out there and he gives up 5 earned runs in the first. That's not in the models, right? Like you're just not throwing good pitches. You're throwing meatballs. You're throwing strikes that the hitters are well in. You're tipping your pitches, what have you. There's sometimes you just don't have your stuff. And unfortunately for Penn State, Drew didn't have his stuff. And if he's on target to Nick Singleton in the second quarter to start the second quarter, Notre Dame isn't in a chance to tie the game. They have to go for a touchdown to win the game. So, the Riley Leonard injury right before halftime, the backup quarterback from Notre Dame comes in, and I think the team that became a rallying point for Notre Dame. And you just got to tip your hat. And do I wish Penn State had won? Of course. Like, you wanted to go to the national championship game, but I don't think that you can look back on this season and say it was a failure. I think it was a very successful season. You get to the 12-team playoff because the mantra has been they would have made it all those times out of 10. This year they did make it, and they did make it to eventually the Final Four. Did they have the easiest path? Yeah, maybe. Probably. But, you still had to go win the football games, and you showed dominance against 2 top 10 teams, which James Franklin has not done. Probably weaker top 10 teams, but that's kind of how the top 10 works. The back half of the top 10 is a tumultuous place, and sometimes you get some outliers there, and then goes and shows that they can hang with the number 3 team in the country. Big Ten championship game. They were back and forth all night long with Oregon. Kind of got jumped on a little bit early, never could quite recover, but they hung with them. They showed they belong there. And then Ohio State, kind of a slow burn again, maybe not a great offensive performance from Drew in that game as well, but kind of a team that just has their number, and they're probably always going to overthink it. But all in all, I think a very successful season. Very happy with the season as a whole. It's just unfortunate that it ended in the way it did.
And it's okay to have a successful season but not be satisfied. And I think that's the biggest thing. Penn State's so close. They're just a few plays away from the season still continuing for them. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is it wasn't like Drew Aller was bad just on that play. He wasn't great through the entirety of the game. And I think that's the thing that we forget. I mean, I mentioned it in the press box that he had happy feet. His footwork wasn't up to what it should be. He was had some errant throws. Obviously, the ball to Singleton. He had 2 interceptions negated by penalties, thankfully. And that's a situation where –
and both of those are underthrown too, right?
Right.
If you put a trash can in the end zone in practice and say, Drew, throw it in that trash can, he hits it. No problem. You put a guy on a route all season long on those deep balls where all he had to do was throw it in a trash can, he was coming up 5-10 yards short all season long. This is not new.
Right. And Penn State does tend to teach, and this is something Franklin has mentioned before, the underthrow, so that they can get that pass interference penalty. If they end up not catching it, they come back for the ball, and usually 9 times out of 10, that's going to be pass interference on the defense when you're fighting for the football. But he didn't have his greatest game, and there was one play on defense that was bad. Obviously, they had some plays there in the second half, but this wasn't all Drew Aller. It's a team effort, and you can pile on him because of how bad that throw was, and I'm sure it's a throw that he wants back, James Franklin wants back, everybody wants back. But at the end of the day, the glaring problem reared its ugly head for Penn State, and that's the receivers room. And they were bad all year. They didn't have great receivers. Penn State's offense was predicated on Tyler Warren and the 2 running backs and figuring out a way to make it work. And that got them to the national semifinal. That alone got them to the national semifinal. That is, number one, incredible in and of itself, because you don't have a number one receiver. You just don't. They didn't have Omari Evans as a top receiver. You wish that he would have stepped up. You wish that, Caden Saunders was hurt most of the year, so that didn't help him. And then you also had Liam Clifford and Julian Fleming, and guys that when the offensive coordinator is mentioning them in the run game, that's usually not a great sign for their production down the field. Trey Wallace had some up and down games. So that consistency and the lack thereof ultimately, resulted in 0 receptions but 2 tackles for Penn State on offense for the receivers. And that's where they need to start, right there. And I don't know that it's entirely Marcus Hagen's fault. Now, the techniques, I thought that Omari Evans' route on that last ball, or I'm sorry, Cam Miller, I think, was the intended target. Cam Miller's route wasn't great.
No,
the break was lazy.
It was Omari. He tried to overcut the defender instead of.
Yeah, and that technique is on, I think, the receivers more so. But the biggest thing is, and I don't know if you can, and we'll talk about this here in the second segment, can fully blame Marcus Higgins. Marcus Higgins inherited most of this room. You just hope that some of these guys show that they can get better and show that improvement. And Penn State didn't see that. Liam Clifford had an okay career in the blue and white. You wish you could have sent Julian Fleming out a little bit better. But at the same time, Fleming, I thought, proved his worth in the run game and doing the other things right. But again, it's just one of those situations where Penn State came up just short, like they have against many teams. But on that night, they might have been the better team for probably 90% of the game. But it was that 10% that ultimately cost them a chance to go to the national championship and continue their season.
Yeah, we'll get to the change in personnel next year and how it's gonna how this team can change for next year. But before we end, it'd be an injustice by us to not mention the performance by the defense. I don't know what Abdul Carter had to do to play Thursday night. Shoulder separation of some degree, probably a little bit worse than a grade 1 if I had to guess. Whatever he did to play, kind of started wearing off towards the end. You could see he was laboring. A couple cheap shots by Notre Dame, which I didn't love. Sitting on the Notre Dame sideline was tough. I had good seats, but the people around me were a little bit tough to deal with. But that guy, he's a warrior. What a way to cap off his career. The one-handed sack with his injured arm right in the second half. It's just what a play by him. Everybody else on the defense stepped up. And let's not forget, this team lost their star safety before the season even started.
Their All-American safety, they lost him in week 2.
So he's going to be a first-round pick in KJ Winston. Tony Rojas has had an injured shoulder all season long. He was playing with the shoulder brace with the strap across to try not to let that thing dislocate. New guys on the outside, Jalen Kimber and AJ Harris. AJ Harris can come back next year. Denidus Sutton had a hell of a game. And that pick that he did on Riley Leonard, 15 yards down the field, fully laying out, full extension. I mean, that's an athletic play. That's a former 5-star guy. He's got another year of eligibility left. Like, there's some dudes that could be coming back. Zucky Wheatley's already announced he's coming back. Zane Durant's already
He has 16 tackles a sack, and an interception.
Who, DDS?
No, Zaki Wheatley.
Oh, Zaki Wheatley. Yeah. I mean, he had a hell of a game, and he's back, and he's the guy who had to step up for KJ Winston. So now next season, he becomes that guy who's potentially a second into a first-round pick for Penn State. So got to give a shout out to the defense because, yeah, Notre Dame outgained on offense, but they had some splashes, and they were disruptive all night long.
They really were, and they made Riley Leonard's life not great, especially in the first half. They held him to 116 rushing yards. They aired it out a little bit, and a lot of those were chunk plays. I mean, that's the biggest thing. That 54-yard touchdown pass was huge. So that's where, most of those yards came from. But at the end of the day, Penn State defense did its part. The offense put them in a position late, but ultimately that one big mistake came back to bite them in the ass. And now, again, it's the offseason for Penn State, and they've got a lot of soul searching. Not necessarily a lot of soul searching, but how to get to that next level. You proved you can win on the bigger stages. Now you won the Fiesta Bowl. You won the first round game. Obviously, people are always going to knock their path to the playoff or to the final. But again, at the same time, they can't control that. They ended up being the number 2 team out of the Big Ten. Ohio State ends up getting the seed that they get, the 8 seed, and they're a really good team. They're going to be playing the national championship. Notre Dame is I think the 7 seed. So I mean, it's about who's playing the best football right now, and those 2 teams are doing it. And now we'll talk about Penn State and where they go from here on the second segment when we come back from this break on the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jarrod. Kevin, the biggest thing for me, obviously Penn State's first, and really the true only look that they need is the wide receiver room. They got to figure out a way to make that work. Again, like I said in the first segment of this podcast, I don't think the blame solely goes on Taylor, or not Taylor Stubblefield, but I'm saying Marcus Higgins. He took over for Taylor Stubblefield. Taylor Stubblefield left that room in shambles, and he inherited it from a not great situation from David Corley. In the receiver room, the coaches have been a carousel of sorts since Josh Gaddis left. You had Jared Parker in there. You've had Taylor Stubblefield. You had David Corley, who ended up being a disaster. And they haven't had that guy since John Dotson, KJ Hamler, those types of players. Parker Washington's good, and he's playing on Sundays. And that makes sense at 100%. He's a good football player. But they haven't had anybody really like that. They haven't had somebody that can just blow the top off of everything. And they haven't had that guy. They didn't need that guy until it was too late this year, or this in the playoff. And they won the games that they needed to win but the biggest games on the biggest stages, the Big Ten championship, Ohio State during the season, and obviously the semifinal and the Orange Bowl, they didn't have that guy, and it showed. It reared its ugly head, like I said, against Notre Dame. 0 catches, about 5 or 6 targets, an interception, and 2 tackles.
I think the offense this season was predicated around Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, keeping both of those guys reps pretty even, touches pretty even. When you're focused on 2 number 1 running backs to get number 1 running back touches, you dedicate a lot of touches to the run game. In the receiving game, you had a dominant tight end who was always open. It didn't matter if there was 2, 3, 4, 6 guys on Tyler Warren. You could throw the ball to Tyler Warren, and he was going to catch it. How does that change next year? Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, they've both been at Penn State for 3 years. They very easily could go to the NFL draft. Tyler Warren's out of eligibility. He's going to be a first-round pick. He's going to go to the NFL draft. Next season, Penn State does not have 3 number 1 guys to go to every single play. They have to rely on a offense by committee approach. I think Drew Aller's going to take a leap next season, and I think Trey Wallace, Omari Evans, they got Devontae Ross from Troy in the transfer portal, and they also got Kyron Hudson from USC, Caden Saunders hopefully back healthy. There are guys in that room who are very capable of being productive college wide receivers. And when you no longer have 3 number 1 options, you are going to have to get them involved. You said that they lacked focus. They lacked effort because they're not getting targets. Receivers are selfish. Receivers are divas. And receivers need touches. They need to feel the ball in their hands. They got to get a catch on the first drive. They got to get a first down. They've got to get a big grab, third down conversion. They thrive off of energy, juice. They are probably the most competitive and not in a bad way, arrogant players on the field. Now that they don't have that number one option to go to in the run game and in the pass game at the tight end position, Andy Kotelnicki needs to look at the room and say, we need to scheme the wide receivers. We need to get all of them touches early. Now, Corey Smith, Quentin Martin, both are capable tailbacks. I just don't, they're not at the caliber of Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. So the offense could make a gigantic leap. It's going to be different. They're not going to be able to rely on Singleton, Allen, and Warren like they were. They are going to have to find that guy to step up. And I'm really hopeful that guy is going to come from the wide receiver room, because Trey Wallace is a dude. Omari Evans, also a dude. Both of those guys can become top caliber wide receivers. And until somebody in that room steps up, you're not going to get the 4 and 5 star guys in the room from the recruiting, from high school recruiting, from the transfer portal. You're not going to get those guys until somebody actually steps up and becomes 1,000, 1,200 yard receiver from the current room.
100%. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out a way to make it work and figure out a way to get guys. And I think, high school recruiting is something that's far from easy anymore. Because why take a guy like that when you can have a guy that's 22 or 23 and has more experience? And I think that's the biggest thing. College recruiting is vastly different now than it ever has been. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest things now. It's just kind of figuring it out and figuring out what you need to get your team better. Defensive line, I think, is going to be okay. Defensive backs are going to be okay. Linebackers, I think, are going to be okay. It's just trying to figure that all out.
Yeah. DDS is back, could be back. He's only a junior. He has 1 year of eligibility. I think he's a guy that would be best served coming back. And then you've got, there's a young guy, freshman, Max Granville. Big star. He could be the next star at DN for Penn State. That guy's still on the roster. Kobe King has another year of eligibility left, I do believe. Tony Rojas, I mentioned earlier. AJ Harris, I mentioned also. A lot of guys on that defense. There's going to be a lot of continuity, and that's good for productivity. So I'm really hopeful about the team next year. I think the offense is going to look different. It's going to have to look different. But Andy Kotelnicki came in. Let's not forget, all three coordinators are brand new this season. All of them started right before the bowl last year, and they really couldn't get in until spring. So now you have a full year with both Tom Allen and Andy Kotelnicki at the helm. You have guys with 1 full year of experience under the coordinators, and now you have guys on the team who can help the coordinators coach. They can coach on the field. They can coach off the field. They can, when they're sitting at lunch, when they're sitting in their dorm rooms, they're out partying on the weekend, and somehow they get on the topic of football. They can text and do all this stuff. This was a big year for Penn State. There was a lot of change, and for them to be as successful as they were was massive. And now they're going to go into year 2 of coordinators, and now you just have that much more experience. So yeah, you're losing some key guys. Abdul Carter's a big loss, massive. There's not an Abdul Carter sitting on that roster. But we said the same thing about KJ Winston. There wasn't another KJ Winston on the defense, and guys stepped up, and Jalen Reed had to fill the void there for a little bit. But then Zaki Wheatley became that guy, and Jalen Reed was able to do what Jalen Reed does. So, I just think that next year could be a big year, and Drew's going to have a long, difficult offseason. He is going to have to hear on Twitter, on the streets of State College, wherever he's at, about how bad he was in the Orange Bowl. And I have no doubt in my mind, as bad of mean things that you can say to Drew Aller, I bet you he's probably said worse to himself about that performance. Not in a negative way, just I have got to do better. And knowing college football athletes, knowing football guys in general, they are going to be their hardest critic, and I think Drew Aller can learn a lot from that. And he's going to go into the offseason motivated because he's already announced he's coming back next year, and he is going to be a man on a mission.
Right, and he has to. And it's just one of those deals now. So, I mean, there's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot to take away from it because, ultimately they came up short, and that's the biggest problem here. But at the end of the day, they have their tools in place. Up front, offensively, I think this is the best the offensive line has looked in James Franklin's tenure. Troutwine has done a great job.
What a
It's just all trying to figure this out. And I think they have a really, really bright future there. It's now just kind of what's this going to look like in year 2 under Kotelnicki. It's going to look much different because you lose your Swiss Army knife. So it's just trying to figure out what the offense is going to look like here for Penn State moving forward.
Yeah, and then they also got Anaya White from Texas A&M, and then this morning they got a commit from Texas A&M and TJ Shanahan for the offensive line. So I think offensive linemen and defensive linemen are seeing what Phil Trotwine is doing and what Deion Barnes is doing in that position group room. And if you can control the trenches, and by every metric, Penn State controlled the trenches against Oregon and against Notre Dame in their 2 biggest games of the season. They controlled the trenches, and I don't see that being an issue again. And if you can control the line of scrimmage in college football, you just kind of got to figure the rest of the stuff out. If your offensive line is porous, you're not going to be successful. If your defensive line is not getting pressure, you're not going to be successful. And I think both of those trends continue for Penn State next year. And it's just a matter of 2 more plays out of Drew Aller. One more play out of the defensive back room. Let's not give up a 54-yard touchdown play because there's about there's like 4:40 left in the game when that touchdown happens. 54 yards. I mean, a 54-yard drive that can take another 3 or 4 minutes off the clock. So that kind of added time to the game from the fact that Notre Dame got those points so fast, and then what a terrible night by the clock operator. There was a clock adjustment after every play. So
yeah, and I think the biggest thing there is just making sure that everything is right. And that's going to happen. And I think that's one of the biggest things is just making sure, and you're on the biggest stage, you're going to be under a microscope. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is they were able to make it work. And, again, it is what it is. I mean, there's such is life, right? I mean, that's the kind of the deal, making it work and figuring it out from there. And when you're scrutinized like the officials are, it's just one of those kind of situations that is going to happen, right? I mean, it is what it is. But again, at the end of the day, the biggest thing is making sure that you get your stuff done. And for Penn State, they did everything that they needed to do. Now it's just transitioning to the offense and transitioning to the off season, I should say, and making sure that, hey, what's going to happen next? Because it's the good news is you're getting guys like Denai Dennis Sutton back. I think that, or I'm sorry, he might be coming back. You've got Zane Durant for sure. You've got Zachy Wheatley coming back. It's just now, where are you going to have to replace and fill? And for Penn State, that's going to be the biggest thing here in the next few days, as the portal is open and people are going to start declaring for the draft.
Yeah, and if you look, I mean, Penn State's probably 2 or 3 plays short against Ohio State. They're probably 2 or 3 plays short against Oregon. They're 3 plays short of beating Notre Dame. 3 losses on 9 plays. You are very close. And unfortunately, when you're a top 5 team playing top 5 teams, the games come down to 2 or 3 plays. And unfortunately, Penn State was just on the wrong side of it. But they have a full offseason to look at it. They've got a full offseason of continuity, I would imagine, in the coaching room. And, just replacing a couple of key guys. So happy for the way the season went. A little disappointed in the way it ended, but it was successful. They had a goal, get to the college football playoff. They get to the semifinals, and I think the future's bright. It's not all doom and gloom. It hurts now. It burns. It was not fun listening to the drunk Catholic fans. I mean, terrible night in the stands for me, but yeah, that we'll move on. They'll move on, and August isn't that far away. That's the good thing about the lengthened college football season.
That's right. And we'll talk about a little bit more around college football when we come back for the third and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jarrod and Kevin. Kevin, Ohio State is representing the Big Ten in the national championship game. They did so by absolutely taking Texas and giving it everything that they had. Late, they pulled away, but they had control of Texas throughout nearly the entirety of that game. And it was just more of the same that what we saw. It started out much like Penn State and the Orange Bowl. Both teams, I think there was a little bit of a tension there, given the stakes and the magnitude of everything. But then Ohio State and that goal line defense proved once again that it can be pretty damn good. Then they obviously get the strip sack and score from Jack Crawford, Quinn Ewers, and then voila, Ohio State finds their way ahead big time on the scoreboard and then off to the national title game.
Yeah, and the game was a lot closer than I thought it would be after that first drive by Ohio State. They force a punt for Texas. They get the ball back and march right down the field. I thought for sure Ohio State was going to run away with it, but credit to the Texas defense, held Ohio State's offense to 14 points for a majority of the game. Didn't really allow that 21-0 type start that like Oregon did to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So good season for Texas. I think that just ultimately came up short, and I know Texas fans are not happy with their inability to score from first and goal from the 2. After 2 back-to-back DPIs by Ohio State, but failing on a first and goal from the 2 is something that Penn State is familiar with against Ohio State from this season. So can kind of sympathize with the Texas fans there.
Yeah, a little PTSD there for Penn State fans if they were watching. But yeah, I mean, Ohio State's good. I mean, let's be real. I mean, they're two plays away in the Oregon game, I think, from winning. And the complexion of their season's changing. Obviously, they had that upset loss against Michigan this year, but that I think united that team in a way that nothing else could have, and it brought them together in a big way. Gave them some time to think, and they're playing some inspired football right now, and it's been impressive to watch. I mean, obviously we ran through Tennessee, they ran through Oregon, and then they did their thing against Texas, and now they're 9.5-point favorites against Notre Dame in the national championship game, which is absolutely wild.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. Just to go back real quick. I think it's kind of funny. The Michigan fans today on social media are pretty funny because they won their Super Bowl in November and have been at home since. So, they beat Alabama in the bowl game, but it's kind of funny to see Michigan fans' reaction to Ohio State getting to the national championship game. But yeah, 9.5-point favorites in the national title game is substantial, I think, is putting it lightly. So we'll see if I think it's probably a little bit bigger than that. But I think it'll be a good one next Monday night in Atlanta.
Yeah, in Atlanta on Martin Luther King Day. And obviously, I think much was made by the national media about the colors of James Franklin and Marcus Freeman's skin. And this is where I think I earned even more respect for Marcus Freeman, is the fact that when he said it's not about me, it's about us. And he was like that. He was stoic. And people talked about, how Penn State was or how he looked in press conferences. Press conferences don't seem to be that guy's cup of tea. I don't think that he wants to be up there listening to James Franklin and listening to different things. So, yeah, there's going to be an unpleasantness. I don't take that as anything disrespectful. He's just up there doing his job. But, I mean, the guy earned a lot of people's respect this week in the way that he coached his team and the way that he handles things. And the ladies love the hairline, and so does Pat McAfee. And, he's proven that he's a good coach. And I think it's highly ironic that that he took Notre Dame to the national championship game when Brian Kelly left to go to LSU because they had the resources to get to the national championship game, and he did that far sooner than LSU has even sniffed the playoff.
Yeah, and let's not forget this is Marcus Freeman's only his third year at the helm of Notre Dame. So, a fantastic coach, probably one of the best coaches in college football in a very, very short amount of time. And, you look at a guy like James Franklin, and the programs were in two different spots when James took the helm of Penn State versus where Marcus Freeman inherited Notre Dame. But he's done a lot in a short amount of time. And I think also we do have to remember that this is a transfer portal era. So it's a little bit easier to build teams. And I think you see that Penn State is really leaning into that a little bit more as of late. The two wide receiver additions, the offensive lineman, and now a D tackle coming in, Mr. Waffle from Michigan that just got announced as we're recording. So, yeah, we'll see. National title game is next Monday night. This episode was brought to you by Good Dog Beverage. Good Dog offers a variety of products, including vodka and whiskey cocktails, along with bourbon hard seltzers. Through Good Dogs leverage the beverage program. They donate a portion of the profits for every case sold and 100% of the merchandise sales profits to provide service dogs for people in need. You can go to gooddogbeverage.com. That's good, DOGG beverage.com to find merchandise and the closest retailer carrying Good Dog beverages to you.
For me, I know we're going to talk about the game here. While Notre playoff of Good Dog, Notre Dame is the underdog. They are certainly not, and their fans are certainly not the around the country, as you got to experience. And I will say this about Marcus Freeman: he is making Notre Dame likable, which was not necessarily the case under Brian Kelly, though. Brian Kelly might be one of the most unlikable coaches I've ever experienced. And I like Ohio State. I said that from, I think, the beginning, as far as like my favorite to win is the way that they were playing. But it's a national championship. It's going to come down to who makes the plays and who wants it a little bit more than the other team.
Yeah, I think it's Ohio State as well. I think Notre Dame is inspired, but you got to wonder, like, how big of a hurdle was it to get over Penn State? Is there going to be some sort of emotional letdown? I don't think it's unfathomable to say that it's going to be an emotional letdown, but I can see it's probably going to be pretty hard to say if you can't get motivated for the national championship game. But ultimately, I think their offense is just a little bit too fragile. It's very reliant on Riley Leonard's ability to move with his legs. Penn State didn't have the best pass defense this season. I forget how many yards per completion Notre Dame was getting. I think in the first half it was up in the 9 yards per attempt, and then they finished the game with 12.7 yards per completion. So I think Ohio State's pass defense is a little bit better, and Ohio State can get after the quarterback just as well as Penn State can. So could be a long night for Riley Leonard. And if you look at Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith did not have a very good night. Only one catch for three yards. I don't think that's a performance that will be replicated in the national championship game. So, 9.5. I think Ohio State can win by more, but
now Ohio State did benefit from other playmakers, obviously, both at receiver and in the backfield, and Will Howard did his thing too. And I think that's the other thing, and that's ultimately what Penn State missed. To wrap things up here, they missed that one big time playmaker that other than Tyler Warren, that could change the game. And that's why they're not playing anymore, and that's why Notre Dame is. And it'll be interesting to see what's next for those teams. Penn State, fortunately for them, now gets to finally figure out where they're going in the portal. We'll see. And I think there's going to be a mass. I don't know. It's going to be interesting now with the rosters, because you got to figure out how things are going to go with the roster limit next year. And then you get ready for spring ball, and then spring ball is going to be around the corner here. It's a little bit of a later start because of the later end of the season, but I am forever grateful to be able to go to the Orange Bowl. I am not, as cool as covering a national championship would have been, I'm not also opposed to finally getting into the offseason, which I think is welcome. It's a grind. We talked about that on our trip home. The season started mid-August for games, and then it's now nearly the middle of January, and it's like a baseball type grind. I understand you're only playing 1 day a week, but practices every other day, travel. It's undoubtedly a grind, and I think that's something that needs to be kind of looked at moving forward. It mirrors a lot of what the NFL does, and I don't know that that's exactly what college football really needs, but here we are.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, you talked about not having a playmaker. Nick Singleton and Cage Ronell, they didn't have the big, long touchdown runs like they had their freshman year. Obviously, last year I don't think was a phenomenal season, but they did make a leap and bound. They did make a stride this season to be better than they were last year, but I don't think they ever got. But I don't think Nick Singleton especially got back to where he was his freshman season. Got hurt against USC, I believe. Was it? Or no, he played USC. The game hurt. He was hurt the week before. So, yeah, it was a remarkably one-dimensional offense, and I think next year they're going to have to be more of a by committee approach, and we'll see how that goes. So, long season, it's over. I'm kind of thankful it's over. That was a long trip. Shout out to Capital One, the Orange Bowl sponsor, the Fan Fest, because we were there really early Thursday afternoon. The Capital One Fan Fest, what they threw together was a really nice. They did the bowl game right. It was the first bowl game I've ever been to, but well done to them. So,
yeah, you loved your sunglasses.
Those sunglasses are so sweet. Also, the free hat was pretty sick too.
Yeah, they sold out of those pretty quickly.
There was a long line for those. We got there early enough.
Yes.
There was only like 20 people in front of us. So, but then the Modelo sunglasses, they're sweet. So sweet.
Yeah, the Orange Bowl did it right. The media hotel was great. The food was really good, both there and at the game. The Hard Rock Stadium, formerly Joe Robbie Stadium, and for a million names, it's Pro Player Stadium has also been a thing. But it was unique. I think this is probably one of the games that I got to enjoy a little bit more. I went out on the concourse and got a lot of looks from different points in the stadium, and it's a very cool place to watch a football game. It's a square or a rectangle, I guess, if you will. So I mean, it was really cool to kind of see that up close and in person. And a quick story here before we go. That was the first that stadium when I was 6 was the first stadium I ever remember driving past when I was younger. My aunt and uncle lived in Miami at the time, in Homestead, and I remember driving on the highway and driving past Joe Robbie Stadium is what it was called at the time. This is, I think, a little after you were born, Kevin, because I think you were born in 1995, right? So I would have been. This is like 1996-ish, 1997 or whatever, and I remember seeing the circular rotundas, like the double rotundas. So walking up and seeing those in person was kind of a really cool flashback to like that was really neat. I texted my mom and I said, "This place looks a little different than it did back then," and so that was kind of cool. The food was great. The media gift was a backpack, which is always fun. And I missed out on the pullover, the hoodie, and the Fiesta Bowl, and that's okay. A couple of the better media gifts at the Tax Slayer Bowl, my first bowl game I ever covered in 2016. I got a Pat Folio, which is really cool. And then obviously at the Rose Bowl, I got a fossil watch that I won't ever touch or won't ever put on. It just is going to be displayed in my office and the tin that it came in. The Fiesta Bowl, when I covered that, I got a really cool like outlet adapter that has like USB ports and a couple other power outlet things, and then obviously this backpack is I'm already transitioning my everything I need into that. So it'll be really cool to see that, but it is just one of those deals where you're thankful and you're grateful for being able to cover those games and go to those games, and it was one of those situations. Being out in the crowd, like we came into Joe Smeltzer and I came and visited you, and then I went and visited a couple other friends throughout the stadium, and it was a great atmosphere. It was a great game. It does suck that Penn State did lose, but at the same time, a team had to lose, and unfortunately, it was Penn State.
Yeah, and the club level at Hard Rock Stadium, my friend had club level seats. Invited me to sit with him. The club level at Hard Rock Stadium that was the way to go. That was pretty sweet. And then the roof over Hard Rock. Only 66,000 people there as the announced attendance. It was loud, granted. Got the sinus thing going on. I had a headache all night. So maybe my perception of noise isn't the greatest, but it was a loud stadium and great environment. Great first bowl game for me to be able to go and attend. Did not get my cool book bag, but
well, and so like you
good,
mentioned
good
the
trip,
66,000 person crowd. The capacity is only 64,000.
Yeah, and no, I'm just saying, like, for only being 66,000 people, that roof really traps in some sound. It was
it was loud. It was very impressive.
Quite the atmosphere, especially late in the fourth quarter. That's really started going. So it was a great all around experience, except the outcome.
Right. And for that, now we will be back with you probably after a few weeks of a break. And then we'll talk off season, and then we'll get ready for spring ball and what's next. So Kevin, any parting shots before we take a little time off?
No, I think I'm good. I'm happy.
Very good. For Kevin Quigley, this has been Jarrod Prugar on the Lasching Out Podcast. We greatly appreciate your listening throughout this season. We look forward to bringing you even more better things here coming up shortly. We'll catch you again in a few weeks.